Sam, well, we had a chance to talk or hear from Carson Wentz today, and we talked to Ron Rivera about Carson Wentz. So it's a very Carson Wentz day. What was your first impression just from the press conference, besides sitting in new seats in the auditorium? And I think it was your first time in the auditorium too, right?
Yeah, it was. I had never seen the fake security guard in the front of not to blow up the football team spot and let people know that that dude is totally fake, but there's like a wax figure. It's insane.
It is. It's fantastic. And one of my favorite times, I mean, I should have snapped a picture of it. And one day I should snap a picture and put it online, because you can't realize how realistic it looks, to the point where what I've been told is, like, people will come to deliver packages on the weekend. They'll see that guy in there and they'll knock on the door thinking that, like, why doesn't this guy come answer the door? But it's not real. That's why. But they knock on the door. Well, there is Nora Prensati, who now works for the Ringer, and she used to work for the Washington Times. So we're going into a press conference, and this works better as a visual than over the podcast. But we're going
good YouTube plug.
Well, there you go. YouTube, subscribe. There you go. But we're going in, not a press conference, we're going into a meeting with Bruce Allen, or an interview with Bruce Allen. So that fake security guard is outside this door, but his arms are folded. He looks like he's just standing there watching. So I told Nora, I said, "Oh, have you met the security guard?" She's literally like 6 feet away from him. This is how real it is. So she starts walking to him and puts her arm out and says, "Hi, I'm Nora." And the guy doesn't move. And it was fantastic. So, and in fact, one of the guys, when I was leaving the press conference today, remembered that. We were talking about that. So anyways, that's way off topic here. But anyway, it was your first time seeing him.
Yeah, I didn't believe it. I thought you guys were kind of clowning me. So I went over and knocked on his right bicep, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is fake." Just had to double check.
Anyways, Carson Wentz is not fake. So what was your impression of him?
Well, I mean, we don't know. I guess the overriding impression was how straight up he was about the circumstances through which he finds himself here. He's on his third team in 3 years. There have been, many reports about, even though he's super talented and there's a reason he went number 2 in the NFL draft in 2016, but his reaction to hard coaching, his lack of leadership, there's been a lot of stories. Obviously the collapse last year with Indianapolis, he was, I think, pretty affable about those things. Matt Paris of the Washington Times, that's the second time we've shouted out that publication already, asked him, what do you make of the criticism, the narrative around you? And Carson said, "Which criticisms? There's a lot of them."
Yeah, and he was smiling when he said it too. He wasn't being mean or nasty. He was rolling with it.
Right, and to show up and kind of be that way on day one. I know it's day one, and if he throws a couple picks or has a meltdown like he did against Jacksonville last year in October, November, when they need a game, totally different. But if you're talking first impressions, I would say that I was pretty impressed by the way he carried himself, considering what we'd heard about him before he got here.
Right, and I'd always heard too, to be clear, I've always heard he's a good guy. That there's not that part wasn't in question, but there were questions. And so the thing that stood out to me too, because he did address everything head on, and there were a lot of, "Hey, that's a great question." Anything that pertained to whether it was the leadership or the play, "Hey, that's a great question." And I think it didn't come across as some fake comment. It came across he was ready for it and he's okay addressing it. He wasn't going to hide from it. And I think that's smart. I mean, I think that's a very smart thing to do.
And one of the other things I was super interested by is he discussed his relationship with Scott Turner, because,
Right.
Obviously Frank Reich, the Indianapolis coach, who was the offensive coordinator in Philly when he had that MVP caliber year in 2017, Frank Reich told The Athletic last year that Carson likes a lot of control at the line of scrimmage. Yeah. And he said he and I used to go back and forth, and we would get to a point where it was uncomfortable. And I had to say, "Hey, I'm the coach sometimes," and let him know that we had to do it this way. Sometimes I would let him go, and it's a feel. So for me, his relationship with Scott Turner, especially finding out that Scott Turner got that 3-year contract extension last week, it's going to be really key moving forward, because we know that they want to throw downfield. And Carson said that, he got to talk to Scott, Thursday morning and kind of just get a first blush impression of how they want to use him in this offense. And getting vertical is something they've not been able to do as consistently or as effectively as I think they've wanted to. So the relationship between them and how effective they can be down the field, those are two huge questions for me that we got a little bit of a glimpse at today.
Well, and I think that's what, he talked about Terry McLaurin and just how after, I think it was Terry's rookie year, where he had a big game against Philly, and he went up to him after. It's like, I hope I get to throw to you. I'd like to get to throw to you someday. And clearly he is. Then he also heard from Chase Young, and I think Chase Young reached out to him, and I think those things. I think the McLaurin part is on the field, but the Chase Young thing is a guy who is a leader here, welcoming him to the team, and I think all that stuff helps get a guy, I think, excited about his new team, because it would be hard to be in his position where you're going from, now this is the second time in a year you've been traded. The number one thing you want is to be wanted somewhere. Right. And so I got the feeling that he seemed like he knew he was wanted here.
Right. And sort of off topic, but, kind of talking about that leadership and Chase Young reaching out to him, I'm going to be very fascinated to see. This might be like, a little more intangible or squishy or whatever, but like going into next year, I think there's like some real leadership questions, not because of Carson Wentz's past only, but, Chase Young, who was obviously going to be that guy and then got hurt. So he's got to come back. And
Right.
DeShazer Everett, a special teams captain, obviously now he's cut. So John Allen, Terry McLaurin, those guys will be there. But I do think the leadership of this team, the, kind of that intangible locker room that Ron puts a lot of importance in, I'm going to be very fascinated to see how that kind of coalesces as we get not only into OTAs and minicamp, but into the summer and fall.
Well, I think an underrated one was Brandon Sheriff, and not that he's not a big rah-rah guy, but when you lose like guys who are just pros, and really leadership takes many forms. And it's funny because when I talk to people here about like when DJ Swearinger was here, and I know that was before your time, but if fans heard or people heard that he was like getting on guys at practice or saying this or saying that, they viewed that as leadership. The reality was a lot of guys rolled their eyes at it. And some guys took to it, but a lot of guys rolled their eyes at it, because where I felt like DJ was a better leader, if you're going to do that, is what the work you put in. And like, that's Brandon Sheriff, is the work he puts in, guys like that. I always felt like, I think Leno is like that. Leno's a strong leader. I think Leno's a strong leader. But the guys who are just the quiet, go about your business, get it done, and make sure others are just doing their thing by bringing them along. Right. And so, so Brandon Sheriff is another one I think you have to replace, but I do think that line is in a good spot with the right mindset of players. And I think Andrew Norwell just signed, will fit in with that group. But you're right. That's a key part of this whole equation, is the leadership.
Right. And especially because I know we talk about how much goes on off the field with this team. I think it's a little bit harder than they might let on to not let some of that seep into the locker room. And even just, things like technique. I think of, a guy who was on and off the field last year in right tackle Sam Cosmi. He was a really, big vocal proponent of Brandon Sheriff. And so, are you going to see those guys? They have a very veteran center to the left side of the line now, but kind of how does the right side of that line shake out with Cosmi and maybe it's Schweitzer, maybe it's Sadiq Charles, who, maybe they sign somebody else, who knows. But just, kind of the composition of this team, there's going to be a lot of familiar faces back, including obviously JD McKissick, one that you maybe didn't anticipate. But how does this coalesce? And I think, because I don't think they ever really found that identity that Ron wanted them to find last year.
I think there was a stretch where they did. The 4-game stretch is when I felt like they started to find it. But for the most part, especially offensively, I think they've struggled to find that. But I think it's a good point that you made with Cosmi, because he did bring up, and I forgot about that, so I'm glad you brought it up, just about the impact that Brandon Sheriff made on him as a veteran and a very highly successful veteran. And the advice that he would give him. Morgan Moses did that when he was here. And I think, again, I go back to Leno, because I think he's that guy too. But yes, I think those kind of guys are invaluable to have around. So we'll see what they're going back to Wentz too. And just, again, the McLaurin part of it. How do you think that, it can impact McLaurin's game, and just, how does it change how the success he might have, and maybe in different ways too.
I would totally defer to one of your colleagues who's a lot smarter than me when it comes to football, Matt Bowen. I asked him basically that question, and he was telling me, like, look, I mean, this Scott Turner offense wants to have those skinny posts. They want to have those deep in routes to Terry McLaurin, and getting him the ball, not just down the field, but on time and in the right place. Because, I mean, that really big highlight catch where Terry had that crazy twisting catch down the left sideline last year, it was a really impressive play. But, the amount of error that Taylor put under that, I mean, he would tell you, Taylor Heineke put under that, he would tell you, like, he didn't love that throw. And so I think you want to start making those throws where it doesn't look like a miracle. And I think that Carson Wentz, with his arm strength, with the savvy, with what he's shown in the league, is going to be more adept at those throws. And I think just putting Terry in the right position, even, remember that jump ball where Terry hit his head and then had the concussion. Yeah. I mean, those are the sort of variance plays that you want to take out. You want to, I mean, obviously you want to let Terry go get 50-50 balls because he's so good at it, but you want to stop putting, hanging the ball and inviting those crazy circumstances or bounces. And I think that if nothing else, you're going to get that out of Carson Wentz. And as he stretches the field, obviously I think that'll open up things underneath if they do it right. And then that just, helps Terry in his game even more.
And a little plug, because I'm going to have Matt Bowen on the podcast next month. So there you go, because he's great to talk to. But along those lines, that second, third level is important in Scott Turner's offense. Bigger receivers are important in that offense. And then having a big arm quarterback, everybody wants that. Cam Simpson plays into that, and they re-sign him. And it's a low-key signing, right? But I also think, like, that guy, what he does, if they have to use him, it fits well, I think, with Carson Wentz. And just the areas where I think he can make an impact. Not that he's going to be a big impact receiver now, but he's a good depth signing because he can give you something if he has to go in. I've always
hold up, Keim. I mean, I'm going to throw a little bit of water on that idea, because I don't even know if that's like the right phrase to use, but I want to introduce some skepticism, because I feel like all training camp and all like the first 5 weeks last year.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's going to be a big part. I'm still saying he's like their fifth receiver type.
Well, no, but I'm saying sometimes I wonder why he's not bigger, because Ron and Scott Turner, and they say, and even if we go back to Alex Smith, when you asked Alex Smith about his receivers, he would always point out Cam Sims, and even Ryan Fitzpatrick.
He went crazy on him last year because he went and he asked Alex Smith, like, what's the deal with this guy? So I agree with that.
And in the Tampa Bay playoff game, he had like 11 targets from Heineke, because he's always where he's supposed to be, is what the quarterbacks say. So, I mean, yeah, he's a low-key signing. I do think, like, he can make plays when available. That Pittsburgh game in 2020 where he had that crazy one-handed catch. I mean, not to second guess these guys, but I just wonder sometimes why he doesn't get more of a shot.
I didn't realize you were such a hater, but yes. No, I've wondered the same thing, because like a few years ago, I understood he was new. He was an undrafted guy. He didn't have a lot of experience playing. He wasn't a big time playmaker at Alabama. I get all that. And, last summer, it's like he's working with the ones working the ones. All of a sudden, De'Ami Brown's in there and he's no longer around. But the reason why I like him is because he fits. He's got a chameleon aspect to his game. He'll fit what you need. You need him to be a gunner on special teams, going to go do it. He's not going to complain. You need me to go in there and block? I'll go block. You need me to go in there and catch a few passes over the middle? I'll go do that. My only point with him, and I agree, like, I always wonder why not a little bit more, but when he does go in, he does fit well. He gets to those areas where Carson can hit. I still think if I'm them, I would still look for another receiver who can also do that at a higher, more consistent level to their liking, right? So if you get a guy in the number 11 in the draft, and he's really good and you like him, take him, because I think you need the guys there. But if you get down to your fifth receiver, I like Cam Sims in that. So,
absolutely. And so if we could twist this around,
I don't think he's going to play a lot more. I just think I'm glad that he's back for them.
Right. I feel like he's a very solid foundational piece, a good bedrock.
Yeah,
and if we can turn this around and make it the SF report, what do you think, Keim, that they need in that receiver? And when you want to go get one more receiver, like, what Is it bringing back DeAndre Carter? Is it finding a guy with a different skill set? Like what are they missing in that receiver room?
I would want a bigger receiver who's going to be a more prominent target. So, because again, in this offense, I think you need that for the exact reasons I said. That second, third level over the middle, some of those digs and all that, that's a prominent part of this offense. So I would want to get somebody who can do those things with a little bit more size, if I can. So that's what I would look for.
I'm not saying that he's going to be the guy, obviously he was in the practice squad last year, but that is, I think, who they wanted Antonio Gandy Golden to be when they picked him in the fourth round
definitely.
in 2020.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Right. And so, I mean, whether that's an outside guy or whether you think he might, show something, definitely, I totally agree with you on that's what they need.
Yeah. But, and Gandy Golden, I think you're definitely right about that. And he should, but we'll see, let's move on. Let's go back to Carson, because we also talked to Ron Rivera for a few minutes about him. So I'm going to keep going back there, and I'm going to bounce to other topics in a few minutes. So be patient with me. So, but going back to that, and with what Ron said, did anything strike you with what he said? I mean, of course, he's going to be their QB1, but did anything jump out to you with what Ron said about him?
Well, I think that Ron tried to have it both ways, and I get why he had to do that. To keep their flexibility open. But, he's saying Carson could be the long-term answer. But at the same time, when I asked, does this preclude you from drafting a quarterback? He said, it doesn't preclude us from doing anything. So, saying this is our guy and he could be the long-term solution, he could be the long-term vision, and also saying, yeah, we could still draft a guy. It's hard for me to take at face value everything you say after that, just because, I know that some of that might be playing politics, but to me, it's sort of like if you committed, I think that you could have come out and said, we're not drafting a guy. I get that.
I guess it'd be like if you get married, say, till death do you part, or until a supermodel comes along in 3 years. Something like that. Is that what we're doing?
Wow. I mean, I wouldn't put that prospect up in front of you. I hope that you're in your office and your door is closed.
My wife's out of town.
Oh, okay. So I guess, maybe that was a little bit strong by me, but I think that, it's convenient to say QB1 and that he's the long-term vision. And I think, let me be clear. I think that Carson Wentz was better in Indianapolis than people give him credit for. I think that slide at the end of the year, particularly in Jacksonville, kind of left a bad taste in people's mouth. But like, if you go back and watch that Arizona game, which they needed just as badly, he was making some huge throws in that game. And so, he's a high variance quarterback. He's going to be, his highs are going to be higher. His lows are going to be lower than some other quarterbacks. But I think that when he's at his best, he can really ball out. So how consistent can he be this year? Not only in mechanics, not only in game to game, but, stretch to stretch. Like, can he be that guy? I'm not even saying that he has to be what he was in 2017 when he's playing an MVP level. Can he be a fringe top 12, top 15 guy that he was in 18 and 19? And so if he does that, I think Ron Rivera looks, really smart, because one of the points that I thought that he made that was really well that he had made before is nobody remembers what Matthew Stafford was traded for now.
Right.
The Rams won the Super Bowl and it was fine. So if Carson Wentz can be the guy for the long term, then I think we start talking about, 2/3, maybe a third and a second, the conditional being a totally fair price to pay.
That and the money for the next 3 years is a totally fair price to pay. That's a bargain if he plays well. And, and if he doesn't, then you're going to be back out there. But I think he'll play well enough for a couple of years to be around. I mean, I would be shocked if they did something after 1 year. It would have to go horribly south. And I think the Indianapolis thing was a unique situation. So I think that was a lot of owner driven, and we all know the owner here doesn't interfere with quarterbacks. So
so totally fine.
I can't even say it with a straight face, but in all seriousness, I do think this will be something that they at least have for a couple of years. And you're right. If it works, then it's a really good move by them. And so let's talk about a couple other moves, because obviously a few things have happened, and they did sign Andrew Norwell, but they lost, they cut Flowers, cut Ioannidis, cut Landon Collins, and then get JD back. Let's go to the cuts. Surprised?
Yeah, I think Landon Collins is the least surprising, just because we've been talking about that since last year. But Matt Ioannidis, I think, was extremely surprising. And I would point to the evidence of, one of his agents, Alan Herman, calling around and saying, really, this move blindsided us. We met with Rob Rogers, the cap guy, at the combine, and he said, nope, Matt's good. And then all of a sudden, no calls after the Carson Wentz thing, even though the circumstances change. And then boom, he's Matt Ioannidis has lost 2 days of free agency because you cut him and didn't give us any warning. So we weren't able to have those conversations behind the scenes. So I would say, that was probably the most surprising to me.
And one thing to be clear, these guys have a slightly different version of all that. So
of course,
to them. But so, yeah. And then, what do you think they lose without him? And the other thing is they are going to be in the market for obviously they have to get another defensive tackle in here because they lost Settle. They lost Ioannidis. And to me, the disappointing part of that is you lost Settle knowing that you're going to cut Ioannidis. Could you have done something differently there with him to keep him?
Could you have convinced him to perhaps flip his commitment from Buffalo to Washington?
Yeah. I mean, how often does that happen, though?
Yeah, that would never happen.
Who would ever do that?
Right.
But seriously, if you knew you're going to cut him, then I would have liked to have seen more of an effort to keep Tim Settle around. But I also think it signals that they do feel like other guys are going to get cut at that position that they can go get for depth. And to me, I'm adding picks. I'm adding so many picks in the rounds 2 through 4 the last couple of days because that's all I keep saying, add picks. But I'd add a couple picks in those areas because I think it's a deep draft and there's good D-line play in that area and an interior lineman and then a linebacker. So then I'm calling it a day. Then I'm happy if I'm that.
Wait. When you say add picks, you mean trade for picks in rounds 2 through 4?
I would find a way to add more picks in those rounds. Yes. And now it's easier said than done. They only have 5 picks, I think, in the draft. Is that what it is now?
Now I believe after the Carson trade, because they don't have their 5th rounder because they traded up for Cheeseman.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that bugs Graham Paulson too. But yes, so I would do what I could to add some picks in that round, whether it's moving back at 11, but you need someone to move up, whether it's using some capital from next year because you're going to get some of these comp picks. And maybe maybe do something with that somehow, some way, add more picks in those rounds, because I think that's where the depth is. And if you're going to have, a lot of big contracts coming up with Carson's it's not a monster, but it is a big quarterback contract. You're going to have to pay Terry. You got, Sweat, Young, Payne staring you in the face. If I'm them, I'm going to work to get extra young talent in here as well to keep building.
However they do that, I guess I'm not seeing a path to get those picks super clearly. But if they can, I think that's a really good point.
Yes, it's
because
hard. Yeah.
But I do think rounds 2 through 4 are going to be better this year, especially because the draft experts are talking about how this draft is super. There's not a ton of high end top talent, but it's super deep, in part because of all those kids that went back for the COVID year. So, and we're starting to see, that'll be this class. So even, I was at Exos, the training facility before the combine to do a story. And even they were talking about, just the depth and breadth of this class is supposed to be pretty good.
Right. It's very good. And I think some of that stems from last year. A lot of guys did not come out. They opted to go back for an extra year of eligibility. So you knew that this year would be much, much deeper. That's why, you're right, though. I think it's easier said than done too, because everyone's like, oh, just trade back. Somebody's got to trade up. It's got to be worthwhile. And who's the player that they're going to trade up for at that spot? Can you do that? But if you can, I would. But whatever you have to do, get somebody else, get some more picks in there, because again, I think those contracts will become prohibitive and you need to have the young depth replacements on the roster, or at least other guys that can build who have good talent. So that's what I do. What do you think they gain? I was to say, what do they lose with McKissick? But then it's what do they lose? What do they gain with him back? How important was his return?
If he's 100% back from the neck injury, which right. I think the signing would suggest that he is, right. I think it's the highlight of what he does without getting the highlights. And by that, I mean his ability to turn a check down that he catches at 2 or 3 yards into 4, 5, 6, and the way he keeps the offense on schedule. Running backs coach Randy Jordan, I'm sure we'll talk about that for a long time, but I think he's really good at that. And if you can stretch the field, if you can start saying, okay, defenses, you got to go too high and you got to start, giving rolling coverage to Terry. That all of a sudden, I think, opens up JD for an even more productive, efficient role. And so what I think you get with him is, just maybe if the offense works out, a heightened version of what he has been. And obviously he's been, super reliable and valuable for them. The question that I have is you drafted Antonio Gibson to be the receiving rushing threat, talking about Christian McCaffrey all the time. If you have JD back, how are you going to get AG those touches? How are you going to find those spots for him? Maybe there's enough touches to go around, but I would be curious at how they're going to have that division of labor, especially now that you've committed that money to JD.
And I don't think they're going to want to do that. I think they're going to want to keep Antonio in the similar role, because you have to use JD, right? You're going to have to, because he is good. Because I think first of all, is a pass protector. So if you're going to want to throw the ball down the field, you're going to want a guy who can help protect, right? So that's one thing he does. And then I also like his versatility as a route runner, even though Antonio played receiver in college, but I think JD is a little bit more refined in that area. And so I think that's another reason why I think that he stays in that role. And then the addition of Curtis Samuel is going to add to that whole mix, because he can do similar things, just kind of in reverse, right? So I think with Antonio, what I would want is taking some of the burden off him and getting another guy in there to keep him fresh although I say that and he looked really good at the end of the year. So, but you know what I mean? Like I don't think they want to give him, I think they'll probably give him a little bit more, but I just don't think that they were going to give him 25 touches a game in all those roles, because it just, to me, it would wear him down. And you look at McCaffrey dealing with the injuries, but I think I think the one thing is they kept talking about McCaffrey with him. So now everybody keeps waiting for that. And the reality is, I'm not sure that that's really what he's going to evolve into, because he is showing so many good signs as a running back that I would use him in that role, because you have other guys who can do other things for you.
So if he never reaches the position flex or is utilized in the position flex that Ron talked about on draft night in 2020, how, if at all, does that change how you view that draft pick?
It doesn't, because he's a good back. I think he's a good back. And, if he was, it's not like he was a first or second round pick. So I think he's been a good back who's an ascending back who can do those things for you. I just don't see him doing it to the level that to the volume that they were having McCaffrey do and moving him around as much. But what I do like about him, and you saw this in training camp last year, and it's why I like watching practices during the summer, because you can see them working on certain routes. And I'm like, well, that's not a route that, and I see this more with McKissick, but sometimes with Antonio, you would see him running around like, that's not the way a running back runs that route. That's why he's an advantage there. And so he can give you an advantage in that role, but I don't look for this huge bump of play time overall, because I would worry about, my goal with him is keep him fresh, right? Cleveland does that with Nick Chubb, and, keep him fresh. You get other guys in here who can help you with that. So that way he's even more effective. I loved what he showed in New York at the end of the year. I mean, he was so good running the ball. And I know it was the last game and the Giants didn't care. I don't care. It's what he showed. So that would be my thing. But I'll be honest, Sam, I've done this for a long time. They have yet to ask my input on how to use a guy. So this is probably going to be I'm sure this will be another year like that, but but that's how I would see him. And I think that's probably still how they see him, which is why you bring JD back, knowing too that you have Curtis Samuel who can do a lot of things as well.
Right. And maybe the Curtis Samuel, if he's healthy, enters this discussion, but it seems like the home run capability that they had talked about that they were going to use that position flex. The home run capability then shows up as it did in Buffalo last year in week 3 on the screen that he can take to the house. That's how
correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off there. So, but that's exactly how
you do it all the time. It's fine.
Well, because yes, I mean, this is just like the press room. So, but I can't help it. Sometimes you just have to Sam, you're a kid, just shut up. Get off my lawn. No,
that's what the listeners want.
Yeah, well, it is. I give it to them, right? But you are right. You are right. Like that screen pass is a great example of what he can do, because you forget he's a big guy with 4.3, 4.4 speed. that's rare, So, but yeah, I think he can be used more as, and when he's in there on certain downs in that role, but I don't think it should lessen what JD does, because JD is to me, is such a weapon. I felt like that offense changed a lot when he wasn't around.
Right. And I mean, I'm sure people roll their eyes when we talk about him, but what Curtis Samuel can do over the middle or as a gadget player, I know we keep talking about and it's March, and I'm sure people are like, pump the brakes, but
yeah.
But I'm just saying, if he can get over the middle, if Carson can throw the deep ball, I think that if Carson Wentz lasts more than 16 plays, which I think is the number of plays that Ryan Fitzpatrick played last year, I think we're going to be able to get a true evaluation of Scott Turner, because
yes, agreed.
That I think is a real key to Carson Wentz is, obviously when you're playing games with quarterbacks like Taylor Heineke and Alex Smith for most of the time, and you want to be a vertical offense, I just wonder how much we're grading against the curve with him for the first 2 years. And now, okay, you have your tools, you have your weapons. What are you going to do with it?
I think you're right, and I think we'll see, and especially not just with Carson, but if Curtis Samuel is healthy. And listen, we may change his name to If Curtis Samuel because I know he was a good weapon in Carolina. I mean, he just was, and so, but if he's healthy, then it's like, well, okay, if De'Ami Brown develops, and then it's, and if the neck doesn't bother JD, and if Logan Thomas gets back in time, there's a lot of ifs with this offense, but if it all answers right, it could be interesting. And I think that's where Carson comes into play with that arm. So we'll go one more thing. And I guess the Norwell Flowers exchange. Do you think that what did you think of that?
Well, I saw Norwell walk into the facility this morning and can confirm he is a massive dude. Eric Flowers, I think, is 6'6", 330.
Yep.
And Norwell is listed at 6'6", 340. So you're not losing size and, mauling ability. But if you go back and you kind of look at the numbers, which I know for offensive linemen paints an incomplete picture, as it does with every player. But Norwell, has been a guy throughout his career who's been a pretty good pass blocker. A little bit better as a pass blocker than a run blocker is my understanding. I know last year on ESPN's run block metric, he did pretty well. But I think you're not losing a ton, because I know that they liked Flowers in pass blocking. So to me, it's just sort of a trade of similar guys. And so I think that they would, be at a similar level. But it remains to be seen, I guess.
And I think Norwell's cap hit this year, and I have to see it and get the details of the deal, but I think his cap hit's going to be lower, which is another key. So,
right.
But for whatever that's worth. So, and I lied. The last thing is, how good was it good to see me today at that presser? Was that like a highlight for you of the week?
Let me tell you this. I saw you today, and I was overjoyed when you asked if we could still do the podcast over Zoom.
There you go. See? There you go. All right. Cool. All right. Well, Sam, I appreciate it. Tell people where they can find you and plug whatever you want to do.
They can find me on Twitter at Sam, the number 4TR, SAM, the number 4TR. You can find me in Costco and or Safeway, which I know we were having a very boring conversation about groceries before this, but I'm generally in those two places once every month or so. So that's where you can find me.
There you go. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Keim.
Hey, everybody, it's John Keim. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and I'll continue to bring you guests who provide excellent insight into the Washington Commanders. And while you're here, check out the other terrific content on the Ampire Media Network, including Inside the Cap with Joel Corey and All's Caps with Steve Wino and former Washington Capital Carl Alsner. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Thank you.